After 36 months of relentless work, I engineered the core technology expected to save Equitas Advanced Materials from bankruptcy. When the chief executive officer's son handed me a cardboard box and surrendered my laboratory to his new wife, he believed he had stolen a flawless product. He had no idea he was clutching a ticking time bomb with its pin already pulled, and I was the only person holding the legal right to defuse it. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. I want to start by offering my most sincere and polite thanks for your time today. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, leaving us with zero budget to operate. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1. This small contribution provides the budget to pay our dedicated staff, helping them cover their living expenses and allowing us to continue creating these stories for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on the donation page on your screen or by clicking the donate link in the description or comments section of this video. My name is Alice Lawson. I sat silently inside my pristine glass-walled laboratory in Austin, observing the scene unfolding outside my domain. The laboratory was a sanctuary of precision, filled with millions of dollars worth of advanced thermal testing equipment, vacuum chambers, and chemical analysis machines. It was an environment built for meticulous scientific inquiry, but right now, it was being treated like a cheap showroom floor. Marcus Vance, the chief executive officer's son, was swaggering down the main corridor. He walked with that unearned confidence exclusive to those who inherit their power, rather than build it through actual hard work. Beside him was Chloe, his new wife. Marcus was gesturing wildly, introducing the highly complex measuring devices to her as if he actually understood what any of them did. Chloe looked entirely out of place among the mass spectrometers and high-pressure extrusion rigs. She wore a designer dress and heavy heels that clicked sharply against the polished concrete floor, pointing at the sensitive calibration arrays like they were interesting pieces of modern art. It was a pathetic display of arrogance and corporate hypocrisy, watching the two of them parade through a space where actual innovation took place. Suddenly, Marcus stopped and knocked aggressively on my glass door, beckoning me out into the hallway. I saved my current thermal simulation, stood up, and walked out to meet them. The ambient hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade into the background as Marcus puffed out his chest. He did not bother to bring a representative from Human Resources. He did not invite me into a private office for a professional discussion, right there in the open corridor, in front of anyone who happened to be walking by. He loudly declared that my position as the chief project engineer was terminated effective immediately. He threw around empty corporate jargon, claiming the decision was made under the guise of personnel optimization and strategic restructuring. It was a thinly veiled excuse to clear the board of the only person who actually understood the science. He then brazenly ordered me to leave every single solid-state drive, every physical notebook, and all digital backups containing my exhaustive research on the proprietary heat-resistant polymer right there on my desk. He wanted a clean sweep of all my intellectual property. With a sickeningly proud grin, he announced the real reason for my sudden termination. Chloe was stepping in to take my place. She was officially assuming the title of Vice President of Innovation. It was almost comical. I had spent thousands of hours over the last 2 years developing a revolutionary material that could withstand extreme atmospheric temperatures, and he was handing the keys to a woman who probably could not balance a basic chemical equation. Chloe stepped forward then, attempting to soften the blow with a display of fake sympathy. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on my arm and tilted her head. "I am so incredibly sorry, Alice," she crooned, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We all know how hard you worked on this project, but the board simply feels the company needs a fresh, dynamic direction moving forward." I did not even have time to process the sheer audacity of her fake pity before her tone shifted entirely. The saccharine smile remained, but her eyes grew sharp with entitlement. "Oh, by the way, before you pack up your personal items, I am going to need the master passwords to access your core formula repository. We really need to ensure a seamless transition for the investors." I looked down at her hand resting on my sleeve. Then I looked up into Marcus's smug, self-satisfied face. I chose absolute silence. I did not resist their demands. I did not argue about the injustice of it all. I did not raise my voice, threaten a lawsuit, or shed a single tear of frustration. Instead, I remained perfectly composed. I used those quiet seconds to calmly and methodically record every single detail of their arrogant expressions into my memory. I wanted to remember exactly how victorious they felt in this fleeting moment. Without saying a word, I turned around and walked slowly back to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a standard silver flash drive. It contained a massive archive of baseline data, but it was completely outdated. It was the flawed, highly unstable early iterations of the polymer from exactly 2 years ago, data I had long since abandoned because it degraded under pressure. I walked back out to the hallway and casually handed the drive over to Chloe. Her eyes lit up with greedy triumph as her fingers closed around the metal casing. I turned my back on them, calmly picked up my coat from the rack, grabbed my personal bag, and walked toward the exit. I stepped out of the building and into the warm Texas afternoon without taking a single physical prototype with me. I left them with nothing but their own arrogance and a worthless piece of plastic. The drive back to my apartment took exactly 45 minutes, but my mind was operating light years ahead of the traffic on the interstate. As soon as I unlocked my front door, I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight into my home office. I immediately booted up my personal, heavily encrypted workstation. This machine was a beast of processing power, a far cry from the standard issue laptops Equitas provided to its employees. More importantly, this server was completely isolated from any corporate network. As the multiple monitors flickered to life, bathing the dim room in a cool blue glow, I accessed the deeply hidden directories. This was the true vault. Here lay every single line of the actual algorithmic code and the exact perfected chemical formulas of the project. The real sequence required a highly volatile catalytic solvent to stabilize the molecular cross-linking, a crucial step entirely missing from the dummy data I had left behind on my corporate desk. With a few precise keystrokes, I initiated a comprehensive review of my entire research timeline. I needed to ensure that my digital paper trail was utterly impenetrable. I pulled up my initial laboratory notes, video logs, and time-stamped purchase orders for raw materials. The evidence was overwhelming and indisputable. It clearly documented, with secure cryptographic timestamps, that I had independently developed the foundational compound of this heat-resistant polymer right here, in my own detached garage. A full 6 months before Equitas Advanced Materials ever approached me with their first round of venture capital funding, I had the receipts for every piece of rudimentary equipment, every beaker, every single hour of late-night testing, and every microscopic failure and success during those grueling early days was funded entirely by my own personal savings. Equitas had merely paid for the luxury of a glass-walled facility for the final stress testing. Not the genesis of the invention itself. The intellectual foundation belonged solely to me. Next, I opened a secure browser window and navigated to the official government portal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I carefully typed in my credentials and accessed my private dashboard. There it was, shining like a beacon of absolute legal authority. I clicked the download button and saved the final, certified document that confirmed my independent intellectual property rights. The wording was airtight, meticulously drafted by an expert attorney to cover every possible iteration of the synthetic compound, leaving absolutely zero room for corporate loopholes or external claims of ownership. It detailed the exact percentages of the catalytic agents, the precise degrees of heat tolerance, and the specific molecular bonds that made the material entirely unique. I sat back and allowed myself a brief, quiet moment of satisfaction as I read over the official grant. The patent for this revolutionary high-temperature polymer material had been legally approved and registered under my own personal entity, Lawson Advanced Synthetics, Limited Liability Company, and the timing was nothing short of poetic. The official stamp of approval was dated exactly 3 weeks before Marcus Vance decided to abruptly terminate my employment. They did not own the formula yesterday. They did not own it today. And they certainly would not own it tomorrow. But a patent alone was not enough. I needed to prove their negligence. I opened my archived local email client and began categorizing a very specific chain of correspondence. Months ago, when the project first showed viable commercial promise, Human Resources had flagged a missing document in my employee file. I found the exact email thread where I had reminded Marcus about the mandatory intellectual property assignment agreement. He needed to sign it to officially transfer the rights from my name to the company. I clicked on his reply, dated from 4 months ago. His response was a masterpiece of arrogant penny-pinching. "Alice, do not bother me with this administrative nonsense," he had written. "Our external legal counsel wants $2,500 just to draft and process these transfer documents. We are trying to optimize our operational budget, not waste it on redundant paperwork for an in-house project. Consider it a non-issue. Do not bring it up again." He had proudly refused to secure a multi-million-dollar asset just to save a fraction of a percent on legal fees. I carefully exported this entire email chain, converting it into secured, read-only document files, and backed them up across 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. His own arrogant words would serve as the final nail in the coffin. Finally, I had one last administrative task to complete to lock the trap securely in place. I opened my personal email account and drafted a highly professional, entirely neutral message addressed directly to the head of the Human Resources Department. I stated that, per my sudden termination earlier that afternoon by the Chief Executive Officer's son, I was formally acknowledging my departure. More importantly, I explicitly requested them to confirm in writing that my security badges had been deactivated and that I was officially locked out of all internal company servers and communication networks as of 2 o'clock this afternoon. I hit send and watched the message fly off into the digital ether. Within 15 minutes, an automated and legally binding reply from Human Resources landed in my inbox, confirming my complete severance from their systems. The fortress was now built. I had locked the gates, and Equitas was trapped outside, holding an empty box, entirely unaware of the legal avalanche I had just prepared. Over the next 14 days, Equitas Advanced Materials transformed into a theater of absolute corporate desperation. The marketing department went into a frenzy of overdrive, loudly preparing for a massive, high-stakes presentation. Their ultimate target was Titan Tech, a global technology behemoth and the single largest potential client in our industry sector. Securing a lucrative contract with Titan Tech was not just an ambitious goal for Equitas. It was their absolute last lifeline to avoid total financial ruin. They were actively promising a revolution in aerospace materials, banking the entire future of the company on a technology they fundamentally did not comprehend. Sitting in the quiet comfort of my living room, I watched the disaster unfold in real time through the eyes of a highly reliable informant, a former colleague of mine, a senior laboratory technician who despised Marcus's nepotism just as much as I did, began secretly leaking internal information to me. He used an encrypted messaging application to send me daily updates that read like a corporate tragicomedy. According to his detailed messages, Chloe was completely paralyzed by the sheer complexity of the project. As the newly minted Vice President of Innovation, she was officially expected to lead the final production phase and guide the engineering team. Instead, she was visibly drowning. My informant described how she spent hours staring blankly at the complex thermodynamic equations written on the glass whiteboards, entirely clueless about the necessary vulcanization process of the polymer. The raw data I had left behind on that silver flash drive was highly unstable, requiring a deeply nuanced understanding of molecular cross-linking to even begin making sense of it. Chloe, possessing zero actual background in advanced chemical engineering, was essentially trying to decipher an ancient language without a translation guide. As the presentation date loomed ominously closer, the atmosphere inside the laboratory turned incredibly toxic. Marcus, driven by a volatile cocktail of blind arrogance and mounting panic, began frantically pressuring the technical team. He stormed into the sterile testing bays, his face flushed bright red, screaming at the veteran engineers to completely bypass the mandatory thermal safety checks. "We do not have the budget or the time for endless safety simulations," Marcus had yelled during a morning briefing, a quote relayed word for word by my inside source. "Titan Tech executives are walking through those doors in less than 72 hours. Just use her initial blueprints, push the raw compound into the hydraulic molds, and make it work." He was relentlessly forcing them to rely exclusively on those outdated, flawed baseline sketches I had intentionally surrendered. He fundamentally believed that intricate science could simply be bullied into submission through middle management intimidation. Desperate to prove her unearned worth and silence the growing whispers of incompetence among the laboratory staff, Chloe foolishly attempted to personally synthesize a new batch of the compound. She donned a pristine white lab coat purely for optics, mixing the raw chemical precursors herself while the team watched in strained silence. But without my proprietary stabilization algorithms, her experiment was a spectacular, undeniable failure. The result she pulled from the thermal press was not a resilient, heat-defying wonder material. It was a porous, profoundly brittle block of useless gray plastic. When she confidently tried to demonstrate its structural integrity to Marcus, the dull slab shattered into dozens of jagged pieces under a mere 10 pounds of applied pressure. It crumbled away like stale bread, leaving a powdery, embarrassing mess all over the expensive testing rig. Complete panic officially set in across the executive suite. With the Titan Tech delegation scheduled to arrive in just 2 days, they had absolutely no viable product to demonstrate. Any rational, ethical leader would have immediately postponed the meeting, admitted to an unforeseen delay in the developmental timeline, and sought external assistance. But Marcus Vance was not a rational leader. He was a cornered animal driven entirely by his own inflated ego. Rather than face the humiliating reality of failure, Marcus made a fatal, unethical decision. He ordered his private security team to forcefully override the electronic locks on the deepest subterranean storage vault in the facility. He knew that before my abrupt termination, I had secured one single, perfectly formed physical prototype inside that heavily guarded vault. It was a master sample, a solid sphere of the completed polymer created during my very last successful test run. He commanded his staff to steal that specific prototype, polish its surface, and place it on the presentation pedestal. His plan was to present it to Titan Tech as Chloe's own recent creation, intending to lie straight to the faces of the most powerful and discerning technology executives in the world. When my phone buzzed with the covert message detailing this specific theft, I could not help but laugh out loud. The sheer, breathtaking stupidity of his plan was magnificent to witness. I smiled, a deep feeling of genuine satisfaction washing over me, because I knew a critical, undeniable scientific truth about that stolen master prototype. While the physical shape of the polymer sphere in that vault was structurally flawless, the chemical matrix inside it was completely dormant. To successfully maintain its indestructible durability and survive being subjected to thousands of degrees of raw heat, that specific prototype required a mandatory pre-treatment soak in a highly specialized, proprietary catalytic solvent, without being completely submerged and bathed in that exact chemical activator for 24 hours prior to a stress test. The internal molecular bonds would rapidly and violently destabilize when exposed to a sudden, extreme temperature spike. Marcus and Chloe had stolen the physical object, but they had absolutely no idea how to activate its defensive thermal properties. They were blindly walking into a high-stakes demonstration holding a dormant, highly reactive piece of material, firmly believing they were invincible. They had built their entire stage out of kindling, and they were about to eagerly hand the client a lit match. I knew that simply having the truth on my side was not enough. In the cutthroat world of corporate technology, truth requires a devastating delivery system. My first move was to contact a highly specialized intellectual property attorney located in the heart of downtown Austin. He was a man known for his surgical precision in destroying corporate theft. During our strictly confidential meeting, I laid out the entire timeline and presented my ironclad patent. I handed him a retainer fee of $10,000 and gave him a very specific set of instructions. He was to draft a lethal, uncompromising cease and desist order, threatening catastrophic litigation against Equitas Advanced Materials. However, the most critical element was the timing. I ordered him to configure the email servers to hold the injunction. It was programmed on a deliberate time delay, scheduled to automatically blast into the inboxes of the Equitas Board of Directors and their legal department at precisely 10 o'clock in the morning on the exact day of the presentation. It was a digital guillotine, hoisted high and waiting for the rope to be cut. With the legal trap securely set, I needed to ensure I was physically present to watch the execution. Obviously, my former employer was not going to invite the woman they had just fired to their most crucial client meeting, but I did not need Equitas to grant me access. I only needed Titan Tech. I reached out to a senior director of quality assurance working inside the Titan Tech headquarters. 3 years ago, I had quietly warned him about a microscopic flaw in a massive shipment of semiconductor materials, saving his department tens of millions of dollars and rescuing his career from ruin. He owed me a profound debt of gratitude when I called his private number and asked for a silent favor. He did not hesitate. "Just give me the word, Alice, and your name will be on the authorized visitor manifest," he assured me. While the clock ticked down to the final demonstration, I did not just sit idle. I spent my evenings tracking the Equitas supply chain through public freight registries and industry whispers. What I discovered was a staggering display of arrogant negligence. Marcus was already authorizing the expenditure of massive amounts of corporate funds. He was placing advance orders for hundreds of tons of raw industrial resins and heavy manufacturing machinery. He was actively preparing to mass-produce a product without actually possessing the stabilized core formula. They were building a massive, expensive house of cards on a foundation of absolute lies, and I meticulously gathered every single digital shipping manifest to prove their fraudulent intent. The night before the event, I stood in my home office and physically constructed the instrument of their demise. I wanted something tactile, something heavy and undeniable. I took a thick, reinforced manila folder and began filling it with absolute, undeniable reality. First went the original, government-issued patent document, printed on heavy parchment paper. Next, I added over 40 pages of itemized purchase receipts from my personal bank accounts, detailing every beaker, every chemical precursor, and every piece of testing equipment I had bought for my garage laboratory. Finally, I placed the printed copies of the email chain where Marcus had stubbornly refused to pay a meager $2,500 legal processing fee to secure the rights. I aligned the edges perfectly, bound the pages together, and sealed the folder. It felt incredibly heavy in my hands. The morning of the presentation finally arrived. I woke up at exactly 5 o'clock. The air outside was cool and still. I dressed with deliberate care, putting on a sharp charcoal gray tailored suit that projected absolute authority. I drove my car down the highway, watching the Texas sun slowly rise over the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. By 8:45, I pulled into the sprawling, heavily secured campus of the Titan Tech headquarters. I walked through the towering glass doors of the main lobby, my footsteps echoing against the polished marble floors. I approached the reception desk, presented my identification, and calmly signed the digital guest registry under the title of Independent Technical Advisor. The machine printed my access badge, and I clipped it securely to my lapel. I navigated the sweeping corridors of the facility, making my way toward the primary executive theater. It was a massive, intimidating room designed for high-stakes negotiations, featuring tiered seating, wraparound acoustic paneling, and a brightly illuminated central stage. I slipped through the heavy rear doors just as the room was beginning to fill. Instead of taking a prominent seat near the front, I strategically selected a chair in the very back row, perfectly obscured by the shadows cast from the overhanging projection booth. I sat down, crossed my legs, and rested the heavy manila folder on my lap. The ambient chatter in the room suddenly died down. Right on schedule. The front doors swung open. Marcus and Chloe confidently marched into the auditorium, radiating a sickening aura of unearned triumph. They stepped up onto the brightly lit podium to begin their symphony of lies, completely unaware that the true owner of the stage was sitting quietly in the dark, waiting for the music to stop. The auditorium was perfectly silent as Marcus leaned forward and adjusted the slim microphone on the podium. A semicircle of 7 highly influential Titan Tech board members sat behind a curved, polished mahogany desk, their expressions completely unreadable. Marcus flashed a blinding, incredibly artificial smile, straightening his tie with a practiced air of authority. "Distinguished members of the board," Marcus began, his voice echoing smoothly through the state-of-the-art acoustic chamber. "Today, we are not just presenting a new synthetic material, we are introducing a total paradigm shift in aerospace engineering and industrial manufacturing." He stepped away from the podium, pacing across the wide stage while using expansive, highly theatrical hand gestures. For the next 10 minutes, he threw out an endless stream of hollow corporate buzzwords. He spoke of synergistic vertical integration, dynamic scalability, and disruptive thermal solutions. He aggressively hyped the biological polymer as a miracle of modern science, spinning a grand narrative without conveying a single piece of actual, verifiable scientific data. Then, he stopped and swept his hand dramatically toward the side of the stage. "But I cannot take credit for this monumental leap forward. The sole genius behind this revolutionary technology, the brilliant mind who worked tirelessly day and night to bring this vision to life, is our newly appointed Vice President of Innovation, Chloe." Chloe stepped out from the wings, soaking in the bright spotlight. She wore a tailored designer suit and offered a practiced, overly humble nod to the executives. Walking confidently to the center of the stage, she approached a massive, reinforced plexiglass testing chamber. Inside rested the stolen master prototype. It was the perfectly spherical, heavy gray mass that I had molded with my own hands just weeks prior. Above the prototype hung a high-intensity industrial thermal laser, a terrifying piece of machinery capable of generating concentrated heat reaching upwards of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. "Thank you, Marcus," Chloe said, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "As you can see, this solid matrix compound is specifically designed to withstand the most extreme atmospheric re-entry conditions imaginable. Allow me to demonstrate its absolute thermal resistance." She reached out gracefully to initiate the startup sequence on the digital control console. The heavy machinery immediately hummed to life, generating a low, powerful vibration that I could feel all the way in the back row of the theater. Before her manicured finger could press the main ignition trigger, a sharp, fiercely authoritative voice cut through the room. "Excuse me, Vice President." It was the lead structural engineer for Titan Tech, a sharp-featured woman with piercing eyes who sat at the far end of the executive table. She leaned forward, adjusting her silver-rimmed glasses. "Before we subject the material to a maximum thermal load, I have a fundamental question regarding your synthesis process. How exactly did you achieve stable covalent bonding during the rapid cooling phase? Specifically, what is the exact mechanism of the molecular cross-linking that prevents structural shearing under high-frequency vibration?" The entire auditorium went dead silent. The question was perfectly standard for a rigorous engineering review of this magnitude, but to Chloe, it might as well have been spoken in an ancient, dead language. From my hidden vantage point in the shadows, I watched the smug confidence completely drain from her face in real time. She froze entirely. Her mouth opened, but absolutely no words came out. A solid 15 seconds of agonizing, suffocating silence dragged on. She gripped the edges of the control console so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked off stage toward Marcus, her eyes wide with sudden, blinding panic. Finally, she stammered, offering a jumbled, totally incoherent string of half-finished sentences about proprietary methodologies and internal trade secrets. It was a profoundly pathetic display of ignorance. Sensing the immediate shift in the room, as the Titan Tech executives narrowed their eyes in collective suspicion, Chloe made a desperate, catastrophic decision. She decided to let the flashy spectacle do the talking to cover up her total lack of knowledge. "I believe a live demonstration will answer all your technical concerns far better than words," she choked out, her voice trembling slightly under the immense pressure. Without waiting for approval from the board of directors, she slammed her hand down on the control console, forcefully cranking the thermal laser directly to its absolute maximum output. A blinding, piercing beam of pure, concentrated energy slammed directly into the top of the gray polymer sphere. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. Marcus let out a highly audible sigh of relief from his spot on the stage. But I knew the underlying chemistry. I knew that the physical prototype was desperately starving for its specialized catalytic solvent. Without that chemical armor, it was completely unprotected against the raw energy. At the 4-second mark, a sickening, high-pitched hissing sound screeched through the overhead microphone system. The perfectly smooth surface of the sphere began to violently warp and bubble, reacting like raw flesh caught in a chemical fire. A thick, intensely foul-smelling black smoke rapidly erupted from the material, quickly filling the sealed testing chamber and completely obscuring the bright laser beam. The Titan Tech lead engineer immediately stood up from her chair in glaring alarm. Then, the dormant molecular bonds completely snapped under the crushing thermal pressure. With a deafening crack that sounded exactly like a heavy gunshot, the solid block of polymer fractured straight down the middle and violently exploded. Dozens of dull, charred shards of useless, brittle plastic blasted outward in every direction, ricocheting loudly against the thick, reinforced plexiglass walls of the containment unit. The sheer force of the impact violently rattled the entire heavy steel testing rig. The safety protocols on the laser automatically engaged, shutting the beam down and plunging the bright stage into an eerie, smoke-filled silence. The 7 members of the Titan Tech board of directors sat perfectly still, staring blankly at the pathetic pile of smoking. Ruined debris scattered across the floor of the chamber. Their expressions had rapidly transformed from neutral, professional observation to absolute, freezing contempt. Marcus sprinted across the stage, his expensive tailored suit suddenly looking completely ridiculous as he waved his hands frantically through the air to clear the foul-smelling smoke. Heavy beads of sweat were actively pouring down his forehead. "Please, do not be alarmed," he shouted, his voice cracking violently with sheer, unadulterated desperation. "This is absolutely nothing to worry about. It is merely a minor calibration error in the testing equipment, a very small glitch in the final refinement stage. We can easily smooth this out by the end of the business week." No one on the board said a single word in response. The heavy, suffocating silence in the auditorium was absolute poison to his frantic lies. The crushing disappointment and heavy, undeniable suspicion were permanently etched into the faces of the very people holding the massive contract. The shiny corporate charade was entirely shattered, laying bare the absolute, humiliating incompetence of the thieves standing on the stage. Before the thick, foul-smelling smoke could even begin to clear from the shattered containment unit, a single, sharp gesture commanded the complete attention of the room. The chief legal officer of Titan Tech, a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and an impeccably tailored navy suit, calmly raised her right hand. The gesture was silent, but it carried the absolute weight of a heavy judicial gavel slamming down. "Mr. Vance, you will cease speaking immediately," she commanded, her voice cutting through the acrid air like a diamond blade. "We have seen quite enough of your physical demonstration. However, the structural failure of your product is not the primary issue we are addressing this morning." She confidently tapped a sequence on her sleek digital tablet. Instantly, the massive projection screen behind Marcus and Chloe shifted away from the flashy, meaningless corporate graphics. In bright, unforgiving high definition, an official government document illuminated the stage. "As part of our standard, strictly non-negotiable due diligence protocol for any corporate acquisition, Our internal legal team conducts an exhaustive cross-examination of all relevant intellectual property foundations, the legal director stated, her cold eyes locked entirely onto Marcus. Imagine our profound surprise when our search revealed that Equitas Advanced Materials holds absolutely zero legal claim to this high-temperature polymer. The national patent code displayed behind you was officially registered and finalized weeks ago. The sole exclusive owner of this technology is an independent entity named Alice Lawson. At the precise sound of my name echoing loudly through the theater, I stood up from my seat in the very back row. The sudden movement caught the immediate attention of the security personnel, but I did not hesitate. I stepped out of the dark shadows and began my descent down the long, carpeted aisle. With every measured step I took, the heavy silence in the room seemed to amplify. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely unreadable. Marcus and Chloe slowly turned their heads toward the aisle. When their wide eyes finally locked onto me, all the remaining color instantly drained from their faces. Marcus looked exactly as though the solid floor had suddenly dropped out from beneath his expensive leather shoes. Chloe physically stumbled backward in shock, her shoulder colliding heavily with the ruined plexiglass testing chamber. I reached the center of the auditorium, walking directly up to the polished mahogany table where the board of directors sat. Without breaking eye contact with Marcus for even a fraction of a second, I lifted the heavy manila folder I had painstakingly prepared and slammed it down onto the center of the table. The sharp, resounding thud echoed violently through the quiet room. Equitas Advanced Materials has no legal ownership, no licensing rights, and absolutely no authority to manufacture, distribute, or sell a single ounce of this technology, I declared. My voice was razor-sharp, completely devoid of any hesitation or emotional wavering. You are attempting to sell stolen property to one of the largest corporations on the planet. Marcus suddenly snapped out of his freezing shock, his sheer desperation violently morphing into a wild, cornered panic. "She is lying," he shrieked, pointing a trembling, sweaty finger directly at me. His voice echoed with pathetic, shrill hysteria. "She is a disgruntled former employee. A traitor, she intentionally sabotaged the data and stole our proprietary trade secrets right out of the laboratory." I did not even bother to look at him. I simply reached forward, opened the thick folder, and slid the top document across the polished wood directly to the chief legal officer. It was the printed email chain. "Page 1, I stated calmly, a direct written refusal from Mr. Vance to execute the mandatory intellectual property assignment agreement, specifically citing his desire to avoid paying a trivial $2,500 administrative legal fee. Page 2 contains my official bank statements proving I personally funded and developed the foundational compound in my own private facility half a year before Equitas ever offered me a contract." The legal director adjusted her reading glasses, silently scanning the highlighted paragraphs. A cold, devastating smirk briefly touched the corner of her mouth before she slid the papers over to the chief executive officer of Titan Tech. He barely glanced at them before throwing them back onto the table in utter, unfiltered disgust. The chief executive officer stood up, towering over the desk. "This presentation is permanently concluded," he announced, his deep voice vibrating with absolute fury. "Mr. Vance, Titan Tech, is hereby severing all current and future business relationships with Equitas Advanced Materials. You have actively attempted to defraud this board. My legal team will be contacting your primary investors by 12 o'clock this afternoon to inform them of your fraudulent activities. You are completely finished." Marcus collapsed heavily to his knees, right there on the stage, his shaking hands gripping his hair in absolute terror. He knew the devastating truth. Without this specific contract, the massive, crippling debts he had incurred to produce the stolen materials would trigger an immediate, brutal liquidation of his entire company. He and Chloe were staring directly into the dark abyss of total financial ruin and catastrophic federal fraud charges. The Titan Tech executive then turned away from the pathetic, whimpering display on the stage and looked directly at me. His furious expression instantly smoothed into a look of profound, calculating respect. "Ms. Lawson," he said, extending his right hand across the table. "Titan Tech prefers to do business directly with the brilliant architect of the house, not the incompetent burglars trying to sell the furniture. If you have the time this afternoon, we would like to invite you up to the executive suite to discuss drafting an exclusive, highly lucrative licensing contract for your patent." I looked at Marcus, who was now silently weeping on the floor of the stage, and then back to the executive. I firmly shook his hand. "I would be absolutely delighted," I replied. "Thank you to every single one of you for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments section below. If you found today's journey of corporate justice satisfying, I kindly ask that you help us out with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the donation QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct donation link provided in the description box and the pinned comment. Your generous support is exactly what allows this channel to pay our hardworking staff, helping them feed their families and giving us the vital resources to keep bringing you even more incredible revenge stories. Thank you again, and take care.